what is the AWS SA interview process looks like end to end. As you all know, in the behavioral track, we are covering the solutions architect track, how to get a job as a solution architect at AWS. In the first few sessions, like in the first session, Jeff Barr and Paul Duffy talked about the role of solutions architect at AWS. And in the second session, Camelia came in, recruiter at AWS, and talked about how does recruiters scout for SA candidates, right? Now we have Roland. I'll let Roland introduce himself.
Hi, thanks, Prasad. My name is Roland Barcia. I am a worldwide director in our AWS specialist and partner organization. So I'm the overall director for our worldwide specialist SAs, and I run our specialist tech team. That includes a few different teams that run our technical community, building out solutions in our solution library, doing prototyping, early career talent, as well as the engineering team that builds Workshop Studio. I think you were just seeing Workshop Studio in action, running a Bedrock workshop. So very, very excited to be here to talk to you about really what it becomes end to end to become an SA and what I look for, what some of my peers look for, etc.
Yeah, thank you, Roland, for taking out time and joining us on Saturday. As you have heard, Roland kind of leads all the SAs would somehow at some point be dotted connected to Roland. They will be reporting to Roland in some way or the other. All the SAs, especially SAs worldwide. So thank you taking out time. Now, what we would like to understand in this session, I'll start with a very simple question. What are the different stages of a solutions architect interview process?
Yeah, so let's talk about the stage. And there's a little bit of variability between different teams. So in general, it kind of looks like there's an assessment stage. Sometimes you can go through an actual automated test assessment that online. There's different questions. I'll go a little bit in detail what's in the assessment. Then usually from there, you do an initial phone screen, usually with the hiring manager, so an SA manager. Sometimes it could be another senior SA, where we kind of go through a little bit of both functional and behavioral type of questions. And then if you pass those stages, you go through what we call a loop. A loop interview is 4 to 5 interviews where we mix functional, but really, really important is our AWS leadership principles and trying to go through your experiences through the lens of our leadership principles to see if you can be a successful Amazonian and an SA. And really, we work backwards from our customers. And so what we really want to know as an SA, a solution architect, is out there day to day, solving some of the world's toughest problems that our customers may have. Anything from they're building a solution that they want to out of different services, like you saw examples right now through the workshop in the previous section. You might be building a generative AI application and a agentic workflow, and a solution architect is going to go work with the customer, help build that architecture, which foundation model to use. It could be troubleshooting network issues if you're like a network specialist. So how do you set up a VPC? How do you do a multi-account strategy? It could be security. So that's a range of things, but really helping it through the lens of helping our customers. So we really want to make sure that you have certain attributes. A lot of people that are very good technically, write really good code, and they may struggle to teach other people how to do that, right? So we want to make sure that you have a little bit of that as well, like you saw previously with Parma, right? She's trying to instruct and teach people how to go through a workshop. Sometimes you got to do that through their own application.
Yeah, and you touched upon a little bit about my next question, that what skills are required to become a SA. But if we dive deep a bit more into what should a person be preparing, like you talked about multiple stages that they're in an interview process for an SA, but what should a candidate prepare to go through, to clear these interviews?
Yeah, so I think in the first stage, so let's talk about the assessment. So when you go through the assessment, there's a little bit of few things that you can do. So we look at 3 primary areas, right? One is technical situations. And so you'll get through some tests and they'll ask you scenarios, and these are taken from the field. So real world scenarios around things like cloud computing or security threats, etc. So you'll spend some time doing that. And there's usually 4 different technical areas that they go through. So for example, it could be cloud computing, it could be security, it could be about 4 different areas depending on what role you're interviewing for. and it'll take you through a scenario and you'll answer some questions. So they're looking to see how you would approach a problem. And so put yourself in a troubleshooting situation. Then the next one is what we call like the technical experiences. So they'll try to ask potential situations and response to get some of your work style and how you work, to get an indication of what type of worker you would be. And then the last one is like something around work styles. So it could be things around industry questions and things like that. But I would say the assessment's going to go through and ask, depending on the level you're interviewing for, various questions around like cloud computing, VPC, IPv6. So there might be questions at the cloud level, and you should be expected to answer that. If you're interviewing for a data specialist, they might ask you questions about databases, relational databases, and your experiences there. So the assessment uses AI technology actually to generate, based on your profile, certain questions. So it's really cool. I would say, you know, we really want your experience. So like be prepared to kind of go through maybe an AWS certification test, like the SA certification test might be a good thing. There's plenty of different courses online you can take on third-party sites as well that help you kind of prepare for an AWS certification, cloud practitioner, and solution architect. Going through those sometimes the associate level will really help you through that assessment.
Yes, and we'll come back to the question about, like for a specialist versus generalist. You talked about a data engineer a bit. We'll come back to that. But okay, now this is what people will be preparing for an online assessment. Next stage, phone interview.
Yeah, so the phone screen, I would say, is kind of an introduction. So usually one of the things we want to do is get your experience, depending on what level you're in, right? And so you'll go through a phone screen, and usually there's a set of questions that mix functional and leadership principles in the question. And to prepare for the phone screen and the loop is I would say, a similar process, in that you want to think of things that you've gone through in your experience. So for example, I came from another tech company, and usually they go through like your customer obsession, especially in the phone screen. And I think of something in my experience that I kind of helped through. And then I think about, we always hear about the STAR format. So what's a situation, task, right? What action you took specifically, and then the results. And so think about a few different scenarios within your experience, and then you can go to our Amazon website that goes to our leadership principles. So like customer obsession is usually one that managers use during the phone screen, because it starts with customers. And then you would kind of go through that scenario, and they might ask you a few functional questions as well.
Yes. Now, diving deep a bit on, there is a question from the audience, because you talked about specific things here. What prior background in IT a SA candidate should possess, like a system admin, developer, manager? Now,
yeah, I mean,
we know that there are different roles, have different kinds of, but yeah, I'll let you chime in.
Yeah, I would say it really depends on what role you're interviewing for. So an IT, having a background in IT is generally good, especially if you're going to become a general cloud practitioner. I do think there are some things you have to learn that are specific to cloud, but I think it's important to have that. If you're going for a position as an ML specialist, some knowledge around AI, machine learning, databases, I think is important. I always look at things like lanes. So for example, if you are a database administrator, you should go and do a certification as a cloud data engineer, because you could then recast some of the differences between what it means to be an on-prem database administrator to what it means to manage a database in the cloud. Or if you're a developer that builds Java code, you might be going for a role as a serverless developer, and you might need to learn things like event-driven architecture with Lambda and how that would work. And those are some of the functional things you might learn, if that makes sense.
Yes. So this is what generally I say: no skill that you have is obsolete. All the skills can be transitioned easily into cloud. Even if you're let's say a mainframe person. Now we have a mainframe organization, such a big industry in the cloud, right? So any skills that you have prior on-prem skills, that will be very handy, and use those to transition to cloud. It will become much easier.
Yeah, there's an SA in our organization that has a YouTube video, right? Cloud with Raj. He was a mainframe developer in his previous career, and he transformed his career as a cloud developer. And I think now we're really living in a stage where cloud folks are now transforming into AI folks as well, right? So like and I think a lot of the questions, for example, that you'll hear, learn and be curious is one of our leadership principles. And one of the things that people will ask in one of the questions is really around the fact of how do you keep learning and how do you keep evolving your skills? And that's important, right? As you transition from someone on-prem to the cloud, and someone to the cloud might be infrastructure, learn how to do containers and Kubernetes. That was my background when I joined the company. I had a background in Kubernetes and built clusters on-prem for Kubernetes. I joined as a serverless SA leader, and I became kind of the containers tech lead. And I was deep in Kubernetes, but I had to learn a lot about AWS to do the security and networking parts of EKS. And then I actually had to learn the native container services like ECS and Fargate, which a lot of our customers do as well. So I continuously have to evolve your skills. Even as a director, I was just doing an agentic workflow lab this morning for fun, right? So that Saturday morning is usually my time to do self-learning, and learn and be curious is an important aspect of your job here at AWS.
Yes. And if you are interviewing for AWS, at some point you will be asked this question: how do you keep yourself up to date? That is a given. Like, the question is fixed. It's going to be asked to you for sure. So have a good answer for it. And if you're doing it on a regular basis, you will have a good story to tell about what you are learning and how you are learning. Okay.
Absolutely.
Now let's move on to the third stage, which is AWS Loop. So a person has cleared online assessment, got through the phone screen, in which it's a bit of a technical and bit of a functional fit and a behavioral skills, where Amazon leadership principles will be important. Now the person moves to the final stage, AWS Loop interview. What happens there?
Yeah, so the AWS Loop interview, which usually in person, can be virtual depending on the situation. We're able to do both. You'll go through a series of interviews. And what will happen is the manager will select a series of folks within the organization or team that will be part of that loop. It could be another manager on a related team. It could be people from the same team. And then there's usually another person we call a bar raiser, which is a third neutral party. The manager does not get to select that person. So the bar raiser is someone from a completely different organization that'll kind of come in and be kind of a third party, fair, objective person. And what happens is each of them really take, maybe one or two of them will do functional. So if you're interviewing for a job as a container specialist versus an SA generalist, there'll be some functional questions. So one of them will take that, but the majority of them will take usually 2 or 3 leadership principles and ask you questions about your own experience to see if you have those characteristics. So one person might take disagree and commit, which is one of my favorite leadership principles, where you disagree with someone in an architecture or in a situation, and you want to think back to your experiences. What I tell people to do, it's hard to fake this, because what we really are looking for is your experiences. And so go back in your history and get a bunch of different times in your life. Write down, what you've done and put it in star format. So, what was the situation? What was the task that needed to be done? What action you took, and what were the results? A lot of people kind of fall down on the results. They don't think data driven. But think of a story and look at the different leadership principles, like invent and simplify. When have you taken some type of process? We use mechanisms here, but when you take some type of process in your life and made it simpler, think of something that you've done in your life, write it down in star format, and be ready to kind of identify. You won't know which leadership principle, because we designed the questions in such a way that it's not always intuitive to tell which leadership principle they're testing you on. So be ready to kind of think about the question, listen to the question, and then try to best match one of your scenarios in your life, in your professional life, that you tried to do that. So they might be testing you on learn and be curious, and they might be asking you how you went around and learned something. They might be testing you on ownership or bias for action. And so think about all these like leadership principles, go to the AWS website, read them. That's almost being a great Amazonian, because people switch roles very frequently when they get here. It's like, oh, I want to work here, I want to work here, is just as important. And then from a functional perspective, the essay questions will vary, right? And what we're looking for in the functional side of it, we have something called levels. So like very introductory knowledge of a technical space could be a 100 level all the way to 400 level. So for example, someone might ask you a question like, why would you use a load balancer type? And a level 100 answer might be, they know the purpose of the load balancer, but they really can't go into depth of things. Whereas a 200 level might be something like, hey, I understand the difference between the routing algorithms like round robin or session affinity. I understand the purpose of high availability and load distribution and some basic health checks. But then 300, 400 level might be able to go really deep around, things like cooldown periods, and can describe the details of session affinity and the cookie that's like placed in the header to pin you to a server. Can talk to kind of the advanced, like how do you achieve zero downtime with these load balancers and what do you need to do? And that's just one area of networking, right? So in the functional interviews, really, they're looking for how deep you can go in a topic. And that kind of is an example of that.
And that's true. I'll talk about both. At first, the behavioral side, we have the 16 leadership principles, and it's very important for you to think about the stories, as Roland mentioned, in your past experiences, format that in a star format, and map them to leadership principles, and understand what the question is being asked, and accordingly, retrieve the right kind of, best matching and answer it. But equally important is the functional fit, and the questions would be very similar. If you go onto Google, and you'll be able to find all the questions, very frankly, whether it is for leadership principles, whether it is a functional. And a simple question like, what is load balancer? Your answer is going to determine what level you will be hired at, and if you will be hired at or not, like those things. Because everyone knows what a load balancer is, but to the level of depth you are able to understand, and the way you would be able to explain is what matters. So yeah, in fact, one of the question in this chat was, can we have an example of a functional? And you actually answered that by giving an example. So thank you so much for doing that. Now I understand, Roland, that there are different teams, different geos, everywhere the process might vary a bit. But when it comes to SA, are there any specific leadership principles that you're looking for? Like, out of the 16 principles, if I ask you, what are the top 5 leadership principles that you would be focusing on if you are hiring as a hiring manager? What will those 5 leadership principles would be?
Yeah, so for an SA, I would look for definitely customer obsession. Like I would say almost every role does, customer obsession, because we work backwards from our customers. Me specifically, I look bias for action. So that's one of the ones that speed. Our customers run into situations. How do we jump and we help our customers, help? So now our leadership principles are designed on purpose to have some tension with each other, right? And so insist on highest standards is one of the other ones that I might add to kind of counterbalance the bias for action. Why? Insist on highest standards. We want to make sure that when we're working with our customers, we're using things like the well-architected principles, that we're building things that are, secure, production worthy, can perform, can scale. And so I think that's pretty important. Ownership is big for me as well. Ownership is one of these leadership principles that really bring out your ability to take something from the beginning and take it to the end. And so when we help our customers, we want to make sure that our customers get the help they need and get it through the end. And so that is a key requirement for me, to bring out like a situation where you took something end to end. And even if you didn't own the last pieces, make sure it's shepherded to the next person. Now, depending on the level, if you're going for a more senior level, L6, L7, I definitely will use Think Big. And Think Big, from my perspective, is really thinking beyond a particular problem and thinking more about the ability to scale out to the broader, how does what you build affect not the one customer, but the thousands of really millions of customers, right, out there? How are you able to affect an industry, right? And so for senior levels, I look at think big as well. Another one that I usually put in is write a lot and learn and be curious. We talked about those as well.
Yeah.
Just because you're always redefining your skills. Already talked about learn and be curious, but how you progress and learn new technology, because technology doesn't stand still, right? Like 3 years ago, we weren't barely talking about generative AI, and now it's everywhere. And people have had to pick up that skill very quickly. Write a lot is important because technical people tend to be very opinionated. Like when I was leading the container and serverless SAs, definitely they had opinions. All the serverless folks, like serverless is the best stack, and then you had the folks that were like Kubernetes is our most open stack, and they would fight with each other, and not fight, but like disagree and commit on a bunch of things, right? But our write a lot is really thinking of it from a customer perspective and saying, what is the right solution for this customer and this business problem, this industry? So like I've used all of them depending on the role.
Yeah, agree. If serious different leadership principles apply, there are a few other in the mix, like earn trust, for example. That comes as a customer obsession, that we try and earn the trust of the customers by obsessing for them. Now we talked about a few other things that are.
Yeah, I was going to say earn trust is very important. I usually do that one in the phone screen. Right. So usually earn trust is a pretty typical one that's done in the phone screen, because sometimes a lot of folks are going to be really good up here, but I think earn trust really goes to the heart. Like want to make sure that, someone can trust you, and our customers can trust you, and your peers can trust you, and your leaders can trust you. And so I usually use that during the phone screen.
And one of the best ways you can showcase earn trust is by actually sharing your failure stories. What I see people doing in interviews are sharing their success stories, but they shy away storing their failure stories or the conflict stories. If you're in industry, you would fail and you would have conflicts. So, and that maps very, like in a way to our leadership principles. Earn trust is your failure, and disagree and commit, that Roland was so much stressing on, is your conflicts, right? You will have conflicts. How would you disagree and commit on those? So cool. Now we talked about what are the kind of behaviors we are looking for a solutions architect role. If I need to, if you can share something around what are the common reasons you have seen candidates getting rejected at these different stages?
Yeah. So number one is they're very good. Like a lot of people are very good at describing a technology, but not describing how they used it to solve problems in the real world, or even if you're early career in your studies, et cetera, meaning they're reciting by memory a technical thing, et cetera. So we're really looking at not just your technical knowledge, but how you use it. If you look at the STAR format, right? A lot of people start leaving off the R. I find that very often. They helped a customer, they described that they built this architecture, they described the things they did, like they created the architecture diagrams, they implemented the skeleton, but they don't kind of go in and look at the results where the application was deployed versus the customer started using the application. Sometimes when they go in, there was some initial failure, so we revisited the architecture. Like, it's much better to start talking more about the results and actually spend a little bit more time in the results. So I think a lot of people kind of are really good at describing the actions they took, but they really can't articulate the customer problem they were solving or the technical problem. And then they're not able to describe the results that solve that problem. So the edges tend to be very thin, and they're like mostly in the middle. But what we want to see is that you truly understand the customer problem and that you're looking at the results you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, the why is important, for any technology that you are using, or any customer problem you are solving. Even if the customer is a problem, you understand why that customer has this problem. Is there a better way to solve it? What are the alternatives you considered? All of those things. And I remember one of the interviews that I was taking, and as you mentioned, Roland, results is where people lack. One of the person replied saying that I got promoted as a result. That
Yeah.
is a byproduct, right? Like, what was the actual, you did a great job because of which you got promoted, great, but what was the customer, how did it benefit the customer, is what we want to understand when you are articulating the story.
Correct. It's the result of what you did for the customer, for the stakeholder. And even if you're working in an internal team, like you could be coming from a platform engineering team that's building an internal platform, or your customer, the development teams, and how you service the development teams on that internal platform. So even every situation has a customer you're targeting for. So don't just think you're if you're in a back office type of job that you don't touch the customer. You should understand the end customer, by the way. That's a good, if you're in a back office suite and you understand the end customer, then you're really thinking outside the box. On the functional side, sometimes questions seem very simple, but like what is a load balancer, but failing to go to areas of depth and why you use it in an architecture and what role does it play and what are the intricacies can really bring out what I'm really trying to fish out is, have you used a load balancer? Have you deployed a load balancer? Have you used it, and not that you read about it? And so I'm really trying to fish out, have you actually used it? And our interviewers are usually pretty good at sniffing I'm just reading and I memorize versus I used it. Because if you use something in real life, you're going to reveal, I remember one of my interview questions about Kubernetes, I spent a lot of time answering oh, the cluster failed and it was missing a certificate and it couldn't find a certificate. It's hard. And I gave the certificate error that I was getting. It's really hard to fake those things because you cut your hands with it, you used it, etc.
Yeah, that's the way you can stand out in a technical interview. A simple question like what is load balancer, or SQL versus no SQL, these kinds of questions that will be asked to you. Every person would know them. Every person would answer the technically right thing. But if you're able to, map it with your experience, like in this particular project, when I deployed a load balancer, this is what issue was. Or in my previous project, when we were deciding which database to use, we use this database for this application, this database for this application. That's the level of experience. And if you're able to articulate it in the star format, you're going to definitely stand out. So
Yes.
thank you, Roland, for sharing this. I know we are on time, but one last question before we wrap it up. Let's say a candidate has gone through these and they were not successful. Okay. What are can they reapply? What is the process for that? How long they should be waiting?
Yeah, so it's really hard to tell from the candidate's perspective. I would say you could always reapply. Now, there are different scenarios where someone might go through the interview process and you do very well on the behavioral things. Like you say, oh, this person would be a great Amazonian. They show great customer obsession. They show learn and be curious, and they've done great, but they're really not as deep as networking as we need. But as I was talking with them, I realized this person is really good at application development, and they know a lot about writing Java code, or they know a lot about Kubernetes. And you know what? I might, say, hey, you great Amazonian, but not fit for role, right? I would say you look for the role with your experience, and you reapply right away. Other times, if you're kind of not meeting the behavioral aspects, sometimes you can be great functional. You might want to wait a bit because and build up experience in your own career and start addressing your real life. Maybe wait a year or two and go out in industry and go get some real world experiences and then come back. When you and think about them and customer lens, how you disagree and commit with people. Think about those behavioral aspects and start using them day to day, because they're generally good life principles to live by anyway, right? If you're helping your customers, disagree and commit. Like people often go side by side and against each other, but like learning how to work and work through disagreements and take a path forward. Those are all things you can use in your life.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, Roland, for joining us today. Ashish, do we have any other question from the audience? I was keeping a
Yeah,
tab.
means
It
no, I
feels like
wanted to,
we are
but
all.
so we Prasad, we need to figure out. We need to have this behavioral track little longer because we have a lot of question, and probably it is in interest of everyone's time. Today we break it, but yeah, we should be having little more time for Q&A because people are asking a lot of questions. So if your question didn't get answered, audience, please send them into Discord. We'll try to get some answer from Roland and then probably relay it back to you. But obviously we have time limit. Everyone is committing time on weekend, so we want to respect that. So that's what I could say. But yeah, great discussion, Roland. Really, really great insight. I would say everyone, whether they are planning to appear immediately or later, would get benefited from it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Now, I just want to do some
Yes.
housekeeping item at the end. Like people who are here, please complete the workshop. We'll share the link. Share the learning on LinkedIn group. Put it on Discord. If you are getting problem, check it into the Discord group. People would be helping you out. And then if you like BESA program, if you like the role and stock, share this on LinkedIn so that everyone knows about it and then rewatch it. And always go ahead and provide detail into feedback so that we can look into it and then give you the best possible outcome from this session. That's all I wanted to say, Prasad.
No, cool. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I know 90 minutes on a weekend is too long a time, but hopefully this added some value for you folks. And thank you again, Roland, so much for joining us for the session. It was a real pleasure having you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thanks, Roland. And all the volunteers who are answering chat behind the scene, there are so many questions. So thank you for that. And we will see you into the next session. Keep your questions coming, keep your feedback and suggestions coming so we could improve and give you the best value for the time you're investing with us. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day.